Most seniors don't hold on to clutter because they are lazy. They hold on to it because their home has quietly become a reflection of every role they've played. A mother, a provider, a caretaker, a spouse. And somewhere along the way, all those items turned into proof that their life had meaning. But here's the thing. At some point, the clutter stops being comforting and starts feeling heavy. Not because the memories aren't real, but because they no longer reflect the person you are right now. That's what we talk about here on Wise Aging Seniors. This isn't just about organizing stuff. It's about reclaiming peace, space, and ownership of your life after 60. A simpler home, yes, but also a clearer mind and a lighter heart. So before we go any further, go ahead and hit like if this already speaks to you. And subscribe if you're ready for a fresh kind of clarity. One that doesn't ask you to erase your past, just to stop letting it run the whole house. Now let me ask you, what's one thing in your home that still ties you to a version of yourself that you've already outgrown? Drop it in the comments. You'd be surprised how many people are holding on to the same kind of weight. Meet Tilda Ray. She's 74, a retired piano teacher from a quiet town just outside Dayton, Ohio. Her home isn't messy, not by anyone's standards. In fact, it's tidy. Dusted shelves, folded linens, vacuum lines in the carpet. But beneath that order, there's a heaviness she's only recently begun to notice. Not in piles or clutter, but in the quiet weight of things she no longer uses, and yet still keeps. Tilda has lived in this same house for almost 40 years. It's where her son learned to ride a bike in the driveway. Where her late husband used to hum along while she practiced Chopin in the next room. Where students came and went with nervous hands and music sheets curled at the edges. It's a house full of history, full of purpose. And yet lately, something feels different. There's a sewing machine in the hall closet she hasn't touched since her sister passed. Not because she forgot it was there, but because she doesn't know what it would mean to let it go. A drawer in the guest room holds 4 sets of reading glasses, none of which she wears. The garage still has cans of paint in colors from a decade ago, saved for walls that were repainted years back. She's not keeping these things out of sentiment. She's keeping them because part of her still feels responsible for being the person who might need them again. And the strange part? She can't remember the last time she even opened some of these drawers. Tilda never thought of herself as someone who struggles with letting go. But lately, she started to feel like a quiet caretaker. Not just of her home, but of a life she's no longer actively living. There's an old keyboard under her bed, one she hasn't played since arthritis started stiffening her hands. It's dusty now. One of the keys is chipped. But every time she considers giving it away, she hesitates, not because she thinks she'll play again, but because she's not sure who she'll be without it. That's the thing no one talks about. Letting go of physical things isn't hard because they're useful. It's hard because they're tied to the version of you who once was. And now, Tilda is quietly asking a question many people avoid after 60. What if I've outgrown these things? What if I no longer need the reminders to feel real? She's not ready to empty her home overnight. But she's ready to stop carrying the pressure to be everything she used to be. And that, more than anything else, is where the real decluttering begins. Item 1. The respectable display. Tilda once had a hallway wall that looked more like a resume than a part of her home. Framed certificates from conservatories, plaques recognizing decades of service, newspaper clippings from local features, even letters from students carefully pressed behind glass. Every square inch spoke of who she had been, what she had accomplished. Visitors would pause, nod with admiration, sometimes even compliment her on the display. And yet, the strange truth was, Tilda never really looked at it herself. At first, she thought she was just being modest. But over time, that wall began to feel less like a celebration and more like a pressure, like she had to keep proving her worth to anyone who walked by. The dust settled on each frame, and she noticed that she was cleaning something she no longer connected with. These weren't reminders of joy anymore. They were reminders of expectations, who she had been, what she had done, what she was supposed to still be proud of. But she didn't feel proud. She felt distant. One day, she stopped in front of that wall and really looked at it, Not as a teacher, not as a woman collecting acknowledgements, but as someone who simply wanted her home to feel like peace. And in that moment, she realized something no one ever tells you: your achievements don't need to be on display to matter. They already shaped you. They already count. So she took it all down. Carefully. Thoughtfully. Not because she regretted a single thing, but because she was ready to live in a space that reflected who she is now, not just who she used to be. In the place of all those accolades, she hung a single photograph. It wasn't official or fancy. Just a quiet black and white picture of her and her very first piano student, both smiling at something off camera, both unaware of the journey ahead. That photo tells her story better than any award ever could. After 60, you don't need walls to speak for you. You've already done the work. What you need now is a home that doesn't demand performance, just presence. And sometimes, the most powerful way to honor your past is by letting it rest. Item 2. Backup identity items. There was a time when Tilda thought she'd spend her retirement sewing. Not as a business, not even as a serious hobby, just quietly, at her own pace. She pictured herself mending old things, maybe making quilts for her grandchildren, maybe even stitching something beautiful just because she could. So she bought a sewing machine. Then a fabric organizer. Then shelves. Then bins of thread, scissors, patterns, buttons. The room slowly filled up, not with chaos, but with preparation. With potential. But time passed. Her hands weren't as steady as they once were. Her eyesight shifted. Her days got quieter, and so did the machine. 9 years later, the fabric was still folded neatly. The scissors still sharp. But the room had gone silent. She didn't sew, not because she was lazy, not because she didn't want to, but because, deep down, she didn't feel drawn to it anymore. And yet, every time she walked past the room, she felt the same subtle ache. A small, quiet guilt. As if she'd abandoned some version of herself she was supposed to become. The truth is, the sewing room wasn't about fabric. It was about identity. About who she thought she might be when she finally had time for herself. And even though that version didn't quite show up, the pressure to live up to it stayed. It's something many people over 60 carry: backup identities. Rooms filled with unfinished plans, closets filled with hobbies we don't really love anymore, tools for a version of ourselves we never quite became. And the longer those things sit there, untouched, the heavier they feel, not because we failed, but because we haven't yet given ourselves permission to let go. Tilda finally stepped into the sewing room one day, not to work, but to release it. She kept one beautiful piece of fabric, a thimble from her mother's old kit, and a small box of pins she still found charming. The rest she donated, piece by piece, not with sadness, but with clarity. You're not obligated to become who you once imagined. Life changes. Interests shift. And after 60, the goal isn't to chase potential. It's to curate peace. You deserve a home that celebrates who you actually are, not who you felt you needed to become. Item 3. Legacy storage you're afraid to look at. In the back of Tilda's hallway closet sat a single plastic bin. It was taped shut, labeled in faded marker, "Dad stuff." She hadn't touched it since 1998. Not because she forgot about it, she knew exactly where it was. She just never felt ready. That bin wasn't clutter. It was sacred. A sealed memory, too important to sort and too heavy to carry. Inside that box, she imagined pieces of her father's life she couldn't bear to part with, his old watch, maybe, or the shaving brush he used every morning without fail. Letters, papers, a photo or two. But the truth was, she didn't really remember what she had put inside. She'd packed it hastily after the funeral, promising to go through it later. And then later never came. Every time she opened the closet, her eyes brushed past it. Sometimes she paused. Once or twice she even pulled it halfway out. But something always stopped her, the lump in her throat, the voice in her head that whispered, "Not yet." But not yet eventually became decades. And Tilda began to realize that the fear of what was inside had taken on a life of its own. She wasn't honoring his memory by keeping it sealed, she was avoiding the grief that came with facing it. So one quiet afternoon, she sat on the floor and opened it. Inside, she found what she expected and what she didn't. A broken pocket watch. A pipe that still held a faint trace of his tobacco. Notes scribbled in his handwriting, a few yellowed receipts, and a birthday card she had made for him when she was 7. She cried. She smiled. She paused with each item, not rushing through, not trying to decide what was worth keeping, but simply letting herself remember. In the end, she kept only 3 things: his pipe, the birthday card, and a handwritten letter he'd once tucked into her piano bench. The rest, she let go. Not with detachment, but with gratitude. Legacy storage often feels too sacred to touch, but time has a way of distorting what's really inside. We imagine treasure when sometimes it's just weight. Letting go of someone's belongings doesn't mean erasing their memory. It means choosing, with love, what you'll carry forward, and giving yourself permission to release the rest. Not everything that mattered needs to be held to be remembered. Sometimes, the most respectful thing we can do is open the box. Look. Feel. And then, with a full heart, let it go. Item 4. Half-used sentimentals. Tilda had a shelf in her bathroom that always seemed full but never truly used. On it sat 3 vintage perfume bottles, one nearly empty, one half full, and one so old the scent had turned sour. Next to them, a lineup of 5 partially burned candles, their wicks blackened and wax uneven. There were lotion gift sets still in their packaging, the kind with gold bows and soft floral scents she didn't even like. None of it was clutter in the traditional sense. Everything was nice, technically still usable. But the truth was, she hadn't touched most of it in years. She didn't keep these things because she loved them. She kept them because somewhere along the way, someone had taught her not to waste. Save the good stuff. Use the cheap one first. Don't open that until there's a special occasion. And so, the good things waited. And waited. Until eventually, they became part of the background, untouched, unappreciated, and unnoticed. Every time Tilda reached for lotion, she used the plain bottle from the drugstore. She burned the cheapest candle first. She'd spray the perfume she didn't really like just to make sure she didn't waste the one that was expensive. And yet, in the end, she wasn't enjoying any of it. She realized one morning, standing barefoot on the cold tile floor, that the habit of saving things had quietly robbed her of the joy they were meant to bring. These weren't essentials. These were little luxuries. Things meant to soften her days, not gather dust while waiting for a permission slip that would never come. So she gave herself that permission. She kept the one perfume she genuinely loved. She lit the candle she'd been saving since Christmas, on a Tuesday morning, no reason needed. She opened the lotion with the fancy gold bow and used it right away. The others? She donated what was unopened, tossed what was expired, and made peace with the rest. It's still good isn't a reason to keep something if it no longer fits your life. Tilda learned that using the good things now doesn't dishonor them, it fulfills their purpose. And in a season of life where every day is precious, what's truly wasteful is waiting too long to enjoy what's already yours. Item 5. Homeowner scripts you never questioned. Tilda's living room had always looked the way a living room was supposed to. At least, according to every magazine, catalog, and home tour she'd ever seen. The throw pillows matched the rug. The rug matched the curtains. The wall art was arranged in perfectly spaced lines. The furniture was modern, neutral, and just uncomfortable enough to look expensive. Her coffee table had sharp edges and a polished glass top, sleek, sophisticated, and entirely impractical. But the truth was, she didn't actually enjoy being in that room. She didn't lean on the pillows because they were too firm and kept sliding off the couch. She didn't look at the wall art because she hadn't picked it for herself. It came from a discount set she ordered online because it looked right. And she'd lost count of how many times she'd bruised her leg on the corner of that stylish coffee table. Yet she kept everything exactly as it was. Why? Because that's how a real living room should look. Inviting. Elegant. Ready for company, even if no company was coming. It wasn't until a quiet afternoon, as she sipped her tea alone, that she looked around and realized she was living inside someone else's idea of comfort. Not her own. The space was beautiful, but it didn't hold her. It didn't reflect her. And more importantly, it didn't soothe her. So she began to ask a new question. What if my home didn't need to impress anyone at all? What if it only needed to feel good to me? That small shift changed everything. She started with the wall art. Down came the printed abstracts. Up went a soft watercolor painting of a lake she'd visited on a quiet birthday years ago. She sold the glass coffee table and replaced it with a soft, fabric ottoman, something her legs could rest on and her grandkids could lean against. She stopped worrying about symmetrical throw pillows and kept only the one that cradled her back just right. The room didn't lose its beauty. It gained warmth. It gained memory. It became hers. Tilda learned something that day, something no magazine ever taught her. Just because it looks right doesn't mean it feels right. And after 60, your home shouldn't be a showroom for guests. It should be a sanctuary for you. Because comfort isn't the absence of mess. It's the presence of belonging. Item 6. The kitchen that serves a party, not a person. Tilda's kitchen looked like it was always preparing for company. 12 wine glasses lined the back of the cabinet, though she hadn't hosted more than 2 guests at a time in years. She had enough forks and spoons to serve a small wedding. 2 cheese boards, 4 serving platters, 3 mismatched pitchers, and a drawer full of silicone gadgets that seemed helpful when she bought them, but had barely seen the light of day since. It wasn't that she was messy or disorganized. She had everything neatly stored, arranged by category, stacked with care. But something about the kitchen made her feel constantly responsible. Like she was always preparing for a gathering that never arrived. Most of the items in her kitchen weren't about what she used, they were about who she used to be. A mom serving big family dinners. A neighbor known for her baked lemon cake. A wife who once set out matching glasses and cloth napkins with pride. Now, she found herself cooking smaller meals, preferring quiet breakfasts and simple suppers. But her kitchen hadn't caught up with her lifestyle. It was still serving the idea of a household, not the reality of a woman living alone, gratefully, but differently. One morning, she opened every cupboard and asked herself a new question, not, will I ever use this, but, do I want to? The answer surprised her. She didn't want 6 spatulas. She didn't need a punch bowl. She didn't want to keep pretending her kitchen had to be ready for an event. So she let go. She kept 1 sharp knife, 1 skillet she loved, 2 mugs, 1 small pot, and just enough silverware to serve herself and 1 guest. She cleared the counters, donated the gadgets, and tossed the cracked cutting boards that never laid flat. And for the first time in years, she could wipe the entire countertop in 1 gentle pass. No shifting things out of the way, no frustration, no cluttered noise. Just clean space and ease. Tilda realized something important that day. She wasn't downsizing her kitchen. She was right-sizing her life. You're not a caterer. You're a person who deserves ease. And after 60, your kitchen should serve you, not some imagined dinner party that no longer fits your season of life. Item 7. Rituals you grew out of, but still decorate for. Every December, like clockwork, Tilda would drag out the large plastic bins from the back of the hallway closet, the ones labeled holiday in red marker, lids taped from years of reuse. Inside were the same delicate figurines she'd arranged for decades, miniature houses, tiny lampposts, cotton batting for snow, and battery-powered carolers that never stood up straight. It was her Christmas village, once the highlight of the season for her family, especially the grandkids. But the grandkids didn't come around as much anymore. The youngest was now in college, the oldest had her own baby, and their holiday traditions had shifted. Still, Tilda kept building that village every year. Not because she needed it, but because it had become the thing she did. A ritual carved into memory, too familiar to question. She'd spend hours setting it up on the piano bench, the mantel, even the side table by the window. And afterward, she'd sit in silence, looking at it, not with joy, but with a kind of dull obligation. It wasn't until this past year, while holding a chipped porcelain bakery shop in her hand, that she caught herself wondering, who is this really for now? Not everything we do in our homes is for beauty or meaning. Sometimes, it's just habit. But when habit turns into quiet pressure, it becomes a performance, one that no one is watching anymore. Tilda didn't hate the decorations. She just didn't love them enough to keep performing them. So she did something different. She chose one candle with a scent that reminded her of cinnamon toast and warm socks. She placed it beside the fireplace, turned on the same instrumental holiday music she used to play while baking, and sat down with a warm cup of tea. And just like that, the season arrived, quieter, simpler, but more present than it had felt in years. She didn't miss the village. Because this time, she wasn't doing something for show. She was doing something for her. There's a quiet freedom in letting go of rituals you've outgrown. Not because they were meaningless, but because they've served their season. After 60, joy doesn't need to be displayed across every surface. Sometimes, it lives in a single flickering light, the sound of music you still remember by heart, and the decision to let peace replace performance. Item 8. Empty storage furniture. Tilda had an antique dresser that sat quietly in the corner of her guest room. It was solid oak, ornately carved, passed down from her aunt decades ago. She'd moved it 3 times across different homes and dusted it regularly, even though no one had ever actually used it. It stood like a monument, beautiful, familiar, and, if she was honest, a little in the way. She couldn't even remember what was inside. One afternoon, as she was rearranging some things to make space for a small reading chair, she decided to open it, just to see what she might find. She expected linens, old papers, maybe forgotten photo albums. But it was completely empty. Not a single item in any of the drawers. Not even a stray button. She stood there in the silence, blinking. And then she laughed, deeply, genuinely, almost in disbelief. She had been holding onto this heavy piece of furniture for years, guarding it, maintaining it, moving around it, for no reason at all. That's when it hit her. Not all clutter is about what's inside something. Sometimes, the object is the clutter. Even if it's clean. Even if it's sentimental. Even if it's useful, in theory. When she asked herself why she still had it, the answer wasn't about function. It was about fear. What if I need it again? What if someone comes to stay and needs a place for clothes? What if I regret letting it go? But the truth was, no one had stayed in that room for over a year. And even when they did, they brought a weekend bag and left their things on a chair. Tilda didn't need the dresser. She needed space. So she listed it online. A young woman came to pick it up for her first apartment. Tilda helped her wrap it in blankets, watched her drive away, and stood in the quiet space the dresser had filled for so long. And for the first time, that corner felt open. Not empty. Just peaceful. Some furniture stores things. Some stores dust. And some, without us realizing it, store fear. Fear of needing again. Fear of regret. Fear of change. But after 60, it's okay to want a little more air in the room. You've already held enough. Item 9. Thought clutter trapped in notes and binders. Tilda's hallway bookshelf looked neat from the outside, organized, labeled, and lined with tidy binders and spiral notebooks. But inside those binders lived an entirely different kind of clutter. It wasn't physical mess. It was mental weight. There were old planners from years ago, with pages half filled, half abandoned. Calendars marked with color-coded goals she never got around to. Binders from seminars she once felt excited about. Nutrition classes, wellness challenges, budgeting workshops. Most of them were filled with paper she never referenced again. But it was the recipe binders that struck her the most. 3 of them, all carefully assembled. She had clipped, printed, and hole-punched dozens of pages. One binder was entirely dedicated to a low-sodium eating plan she had tried a few winters ago after a doctor's visit shook her up. She remembered how motivated she'd felt, until the plan became too complicated, too restrictive, too much. Eventually, the recipes just sat there, untouched, quietly reminding her of another she didn't follow through on. She didn't realize how much quiet shame those binders were holding until she flipped through them one afternoon and felt her stomach tighten, not from hunger, but from the weight of expectations. Every page seemed to whisper, "You could be doing better. You were supposed to stick with this. Why didn't you?" And that's when she closed it. She didn't need a binder to eat well. She didn't need a step-by-step plan to know what her body enjoyed or what made her feel good. That same afternoon, She tossed 2 of the binders into the recycling bin without ceremony. The third, she skimmed it, kept 2 handwritten family recipes she loved, and let the rest go. Then she went to the kitchen, sliced a ripe peach, and ate it standing by the window. No plan. No guilt. No binder. Tilda realized that thought clutter isn't just what lives in our heads, it hides in notebooks, folders, and piles of printed advice. It's the buildup of past intentions we no longer connect with, but still feel responsible for. And after 60, the goal isn't to carry every version of who we tried to be. It's to nourish the one we are, with joy, with ease, and maybe with a really good peach. Item 10. Things that stayed because it was too quiet to say goodbye. Tilda had a corner of her bedroom that rarely drew attention. It wasn't cluttered, just occupied. An old wind-up clock that hadn't worked in years sat on a small table beside a rocking chair no one had used in a decade. Draped over the back of the chair was a hand-crocheted doily, delicate and yellowing, made by her mother sometime in the late 70s. Nothing in that corner was particularly beautiful or functional anymore, but she never touched it. Not because she loved it. Because she didn't know how to say goodbye. None of those items sparked joy. But they echoed something deeper. The clock reminded her of the mornings she'd wake early to pack lunches and make coffee for her husband before work. The chair reminded her of late nights rocking her son to sleep. And the doily, well, that was her mother's. Enough said. She didn't want to keep these things because she used them. She wanted to keep them because they were quiet proof that someone had once needed her. They held the presence of people she loved and seasons she'd long passed through. But the problem wasn't the objects themselves, it was the pause that came after letting them go. That hollow moment when you place something in a box or donation bag and the room goes just a little too still. For some, that silence feels like peace. But for Tilda, it felt like something closing. Something final. And that's why she waited. Year after year, she dusted the clock, straightened the doily, and let the chair sit untouched, because the alternative felt like pulling a thread that might unravel something she wasn't ready to lose. But one afternoon, she sat down in that rocking chair and stayed with the silence. She didn't rush. She let herself remember, gently, not all at once. Then she whispered a thank you to each item. Not out loud, not theatrically. Just quietly. To the chair. To the clock. To the doily. And then, one by one, she let them go. Sometimes the hardest clutter to release isn't the kind that takes up space. It's the kind that holds meaning so softly, so silently, that we forget it's even there. But after 60, the bravest thing you can do isn't clearing a room. It's facing the silence that follows. And learning that peace can speak, too. Minimalism after 60 has nothing to do with cold, bare spaces or matching storage bins. It isn't about having the perfect aesthetic or making your home look like a catalog. It's about something much quieter. Much deeper. It's about gently dismantling the weight of old obligations, unspoken ones we've carried for years. The what if I need this again? The they might want this someday. The I should keep it, just in case. For Tilda, simplifying wasn't a trend. It wasn't about being modern. It wasn't even about making things easier, though that did come later. It was about this quiet exhaustion she hadn't realized she was carrying. The kind that builds when every corner of your home whispers who you used to be. The kind that keeps you tied to moments that are over, not because they didn't matter, but because you haven't given yourself permission to move forward. So she didn't strip her house bare. She didn't throw away her past. She simply stopped decorating her life around it. Now, her home doesn't look like a showroom. It doesn't try to impress. But it breathes. It welcomes. It supports her in the life she's actually living, not the one she's already walked through. It doesn't feel like a museum where memories are frozen under glass. It doesn't feel like a storage unit for everyone else's legacy. It feels like a place she belongs. Fully. Softly. Honestly. And that's what this journey is really about. Creating space not just on the shelf, but in the soul. Releasing what's been quietly asking to go, so that something lighter, more current, more true can take its place. If this stirred something in you, even just a little, take a moment and like this video. Your peace matters. Your clarity matters. And your story deserves to keep unfolding, not stay stuck in a drawer. Subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors for grounded, heartfelt guidance made just for this chapter of life. And if someone you care about is quietly holding on too tightly, share this with them. Because sometimes, freedom doesn't start with a clean out. It starts with a single, quiet decision to let go.